Interestingly, Kali Yuga or Yuga is such a subject that I would say among Indians, young and old, educated or not so educated, everyone seems to be an expert. Like everyone seems to know when Kali Yuga began.
Sri Krishna's Nirvana happened on this day, 18th February, and Kali Yuga began on this day. We know that Sri Krishna's Nirvana happened 36 years after the war. So basically, what this information is saying is Kali Yuga began 36 years after the war. And also, astronomically speaking, Kali Yuga began on Ashwini Nakshatra. Now, I say this date is causes problem when we link this with Mahabharata because Mahabharata text very clearly contradicts these two statements, both these aspects of the 312 BC date.
Namaskar, everyone, and welcome to this program. I'll be asking some questions to Jivan Rao about his new book, Yuganta. Now, Yuganta, I understand this in the sense of referring to the end of Dwapar and beginning of a Kali Yuga. Interestingly, Kali Yuga or Yuga is such a subject that I would say among Indians, young and old, educated or not so educated, everyone seems to be an expert. Like everyone seems to know when Kali Yuga began. Everyone will refer to a Panchang or Almanac or Ephemeris and say, yeah, it's there, Kali Yuga, these many years, when some religious function is performed, they will refer to that timing. I remember many years ago, Vishwa Hindu Parishad coined a term Yugabda, and then they will give a number after that. So it will be Yugabda 5,000, some odd number, whatever is appropriate. So it's in the deep psyche of Indian intellectuals, that's what I'm saying, or Indians in general, when Dwapara ended and Kali Yuga began. And if you ask someone to name that number, I don't know if everyone will able to name the number, but if they can, usually you will hear 3102 BCE. So my question to you, do you agree with that 3102 BCE? And then why is there a need for a book and stating the same?
Namaste, Nilesh ji, and my namaskar to everyone who has joined us on this pleasant Sunday evening. So, coming to your question, I'm actually really glad that you brought up the concept or perspective of Panchanga and Vishwa Parishad calendar because that itself should give us some indication regarding the application of the 3102 BCE date. So, once we should understand that since calendars are using 3102 BCE date, the main or practical application of the date is for calendrical purposes or timekeeping purposes. The problem arises when anyone links this 3102 BC calendrical epoch to the dating of the Mahabharata war. So why do I say there is a problem? My book Yuganta exactly discusses all these problems that arises with this linking and demonstrate to the users the problems with this link of 3102 BCE and the dating of the Mahabharata war.
So Jivan, so if you are saying then the beginning of Kali Yuga in 3102 BC is not correct, then quickly two questions comes to my mind. Like why this is not correct? And in that case, who created this myth of Kali Yuga beginning in 3102 BCE?
So let me just give you one additional information here. So when anyone talks of 3102 BCE, right, they are actually referring to a specific date, 18th February 3102 BCE. Now there are traditionally two aspects attached to this date, and I will give you one more astronomical aspect. So traditionally, what we understand is Sri Krishna's Nirvana happened on this day, 18th February, and Kali Yuga began on this day. Okay, and then astronomically speaking, we can verify that this day was on Ashwini Nakshatra. Now we can further condense this information into two aspects: chronology aspect and astronomy aspect. So now what does that mean? On 18th of February 3102 BCE, Sri Krishna's Nirvana happened and Kali Yuga began. So that means from Mahabharata we know that Sri Krishna's Nirvana happened 36 years after the war. So basically, what this information is saying is Kali Yuga began 36 years after the war. And also, astronomically speaking, Kali Yuga began on Ashwini Nakshatra. Now, I say this date is causes problem when we link this with Mahabharata because Mahabharata text very clearly contradicts these two statements, both these aspects of the 312 BC date. And regarding your second question as to who created this myth or this link of 3102 BC and Kali Yuga, the answer is quite a bit tricky because we are facing lack of resources actually. We have like lost a number of texts during our medieval times, but based on the available resources, available text that I could get my hands on, it points towards Bhaskaracharya I of 6th century C as the originator of this link between 3102 BC and Kali Yuga. So you can say like this link has been in existence from past 1500 years.
So what would you say, now you're referring to Mahabharata a lot in terms of as a reference work, and granted we also have Puranas. So what do Puranas have to say, and also of course what does Mahabharata has to say about the beginning of Kali Yuga?
There is no one univocal claim from the Puranas. I mean, there is no single voice coming from the Puranas. Different Puranas has different traditions for the beginning of Kali Yuga, actually. But interestingly, whenever you have any conversation with other dharmic folks, you get to hear this a lot. That Mahabharata tells Kali Yuga began with Sri Krishna's Nirvana and on 3102 BC. So, like every time I ask a cross question, like where is the reference from Mahabharata? Please provide it. So, almost every time the reference they provide is from Bhagavad Purana, not from Mahabharata. So now coming to the traditions of Kali Yuga recorded in various Puranas, I can summarize it in 5 points. First one is Kali Yuga began before the birth of Sri Krishna. Like in a sense, Sri Krishna was born after the advent of Kali Yuga.
Okay.
And next claim is Kali Yuga was already in effect during the time of Kalayavana's death. So this was like when Krishna was in his teenage years, around that time. And next is Kali Yuga began with the Kurukshetra war, like just after the Kurukshetra war or in this vicinity of Kurukshetra war. And next, the popular tradition, Kali Yuga began with Sri Krishna's Nirvana. And there is one more interesting mention, reference in Garuda Puran, which says that Buddha, son of Jina, was actually born at the junction of Kali Yuga. Like it does not specify which junction, Dwapara or Kali junction or Kali or Krita junction. So these are the 5, you can say like chronological aspects or chronological claims from the Puranas. However, as you can see, there is no one single claim from the Puranas. So this actually also holds good for astronomical aspects of Kali Yuga beginning, and also the link or the time interval between Parikshit and Mahapadmananda, historical aspects of links between Mahabharata and Kali Yuga. So there is no, like you can say, consistency in the statements of Puranas. However, when you come to Mahabharata, it is like extremely consistent. Mahabharata has its unique tradition for the beginning of Kali Yuga. Mahabharata says Kali Yuga began on the last day of the Kurukshetra war and on Pusha Nakshatra.
Well, now for those who are listening, for the audience, this can be a lot of information to grasp, digest, synthesize. Well, I had a fortune of reading the book by, so this is American, the Amazon version, I would say, just this is a different cover, slightly different cover, exactly same book than what you will see from Subbu Publications. The reason I'm mentioning is like the 4-5 points that Jeevan mentioned. Even I would have a tough time remembering, different references. He has those by hearts, which is great. But they are here. They are here in the book, and I have read the book. And Jeevan, I'm convinced of your work. Okay, but let me ask you this question: like, how does like our different traditions, even within the Vedic tradition, like we can call it Indic, Hindi, Vedic, Dharmic, whatever you want to call it, among the population, among the different sampradayas, all of this, I mean, how do we, and you, I think, indicated that possibly this may be going on for 1500 years or something of that effect. How do we correct the course? First thing, how do we convince the folks that what you are saying and what you have covered in this book is substantial evidence? But then how we tell them the root cause of this confusion, how we correct the course? Because I'll mention a couple of points. If you go back, like let's take last 1,000 years, say Srila Madhvacharya, the Samsthapak of the Dvaita Sampradaya, Vaishnava Dvaita Sampradaya, not far from where you are, uh, that is what, 12th, 13th century. And when he refers to the historicity of Mahabharata, the timing that he uses, and I'll not go into the detail, but just the key takeaway there is that he refers to the timing of Mahabharata that almost corresponds with this 3102 BCE. So that's one data point. The second one comes from where I grew up, like, Samartha Ramdas Swami, like the guru of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, that is 17th century. Even somewhere when he's referring to the chronological aspect, and I would say the time aspect, let's say, he also gives a timing in such a fashion. If you do the calculation, it also goes back to that 3102 BC. So my question is, I'm convinced of it, but for masses, there are 3 points. One is like possible cause of this 3102 BC. What is that? How we correct the course, and how do we respond to somebody asking the question, but look, Madhvacharya is saying this, and Samartha Ramdas Swami is saying this, and now Jivan, you have something else to say. What would be your response?
I would begin by saying Sri Madhvacharya or Samarth Ramdas Swami, be it anyone, they are a product of their time, right? That the knowledge of their time influences their commentaries or their thinkings. So, and I already told you earlier that Bhaskaracharya one appears to be the originator for this link between Kali Yuga and 3102 BC. So that is like 1500 years before present. That happened in 6th century CE. And Sri Madhvacharya lived during 12th or 13th century CE. Like that's almost 600 years of time difference between both of them. Okay,
Yeah.
and 600 years is not a small interval of time. It's actually enough for any tradition to get mainstreamed actually. To give an example, in Valmiki Ramayana, there is no mention of Lakshman Rekha actually. That comes from Ramcharitmanas, where Tulsidas says Ramanuja Lagu Rekha Kichai. So that from that sentence, the Lakshman Rekha concept got mainstreamed actually. And like we know that Tulsidas was around 400 to 500 years before present.
Yeah.
So like it took 500 years for now. If you ask anyone, actually this narration is actually the mainstream now. Unless anyone reads Ramayana or Ramayana, Lakshman Rekha is actually accepted event when we do a public discourse. And also, if you take Juta Kana of Shabari as an example, that actually comes from Odia Ramayana. That's even less. That's like 400 years ago. Even that has become mainstream here. So, what I mean here is 600 years is a very long time for any tradition or any claim to get mainstream. So, that partially explains how Madhvacharya took 3102 BC for his work actually. And the same explanation holds good for Samarth Ramdas Swami also.
Okay.
However, very interestingly, even though Sri Madhvacharya uses 3102 BCE, he actually diverts a bit from the traditional claim. Like traditional claim is Kali Yuga began 36 years after the war, right? But according to Madhvacharya's work in Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnay, he writes clearly that Kali Yuga began on the last day of the war. So like this was a question or a bit of mystery to me. Like he is diverting from traditional claim, but why is he not seeing any problem with Ashwini Nakshatra of 3102 BC? Right, because that contradicts Mahabharata's account. So one explanation or my conjecture after going through his work is we saw that there are multiple Puranas referring to Kali Yuga as Pusha Yuga. There are number of Puranas, like 7 to 8 Puranas that refers to Kali Yuga as Pusha Yuga. But Puranas does not give any explanation or reason why Kali Yuga is called as Pusha Yuga. So that might be a reason why Sri Madhvacharya did not see any problem with the Ashwini Nakshatra of 3102 BC. However, for us, luckily, we know now that from the Mahabharata, in Mahabharata, it is explicitly mentioned that Kali Yuga will begin in Pusha Nakshatra. So you said how to course correct. So this should be our signal to course correct actually, because Mahabharata is saying Kali Yuga will begin in Pusha Nakshatra, and the one that we are taking or one we are considering as traditional is saying Ashwini Nakshatra for the beginning of Kali Yuga. So when you are supposed to link this date with Mahabharata, right, you have to see what Mahabharata is saying. So according to Mahabharata, it should be Pusha Nakshatra. So then I would say like we have to follow Mahabharata's account of Kali Yuga.
And you are saying that we should follow that because even in the tradition, no matter what the variations are, for example, you mentioned Kali Yuga, tradition kind of thinking Kali, and there is no one tradition. That's one important point. But Kali Yuga beginning 36 years after the Mahabharata war. Now that comes from a specific statement of Bhagavad Puran. No specific statement completely. It simply says when Krishna left the planet, Kali Yuga began, right? And that is the opinion of a Puravid. Okay, it is a consideration. It is the opinion of a Puravid. I think that's where it started. Lot is written on the Yuga in general, Kali Yuga. So my question to you would be, how does your work on the timing of Kali Yuga differs from everything else that is written about the beginning of Kali Yuga?
There has been a number of research in the past related to Kali Yuga and the dating of Mahabharata using this date of Kali Yuga. So I would say my work or my research is different because I have made Mahabharata as a sole primary source for my research. I have not cherry picked any single statement from any single Puranas to build my claim on. Mahabharata is my primary source, and I have extracted almost every Yuga, Yuganta, Kali Yuga terms or the mentions that I can find in the Mahabharata text. So, and also, as you know, you cannot base your theory on just one statement or one reference, because in physics we learn, right? Like from one dot you can draw a line to any direction. Like you can make any inference if you just have one reference in your hand, right? You need at least 2 points to draw a logical straight line, and you need 3 points for a curve. And higher the number of points, accurate will be your conclusions. So my conclusion is based on 100 references from the Mahabharata text. And also why my work is different is because like most of the previous researchers used this Kali Yuga date to arrive at the date of Mahabharata war. However, my work showed that it is actually the opposite. The dating of Kali Yuga is actually dependent on the date of the Mahabharata war. So, and also to conclude, what I would say is I am not, in my work, I am not challenging the present tradition. What I am challenging is the assumptions that were employed while creating this tradition.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, you actually, what you just said, you raised a lot of issues, and those are very prevalent. I don't mean about Kali Yuga or Yuga, but the way the research is carried out by different individuals. For example, with the area that I work on, and I see this going everywhere. See, for example, somebody will, you mentioned cherry picking of evidence and that you have not done that. Someone will, for example, try to come up with a dating of Mahabharata, like something that I worked on for a very long time. But when some evidence goes against their particular claim, then they ignore, say, Mahabharata evidence, and that time they will embrace the Purana evidence. Okay, for example, they will ignore the Mahabharata statements, but then embrace the statements of epigraphs, not realizing that epigraphs has a lot of assumptions that go into it when the epigraph is written, right? And I have done this. If I ask like why they ignore Mahabharata evidence for, say, determining the events of Mahabharata itself, they will pull the argument, the text, for example, like Mahabharata have interpolations and Pataveda. Again, I will say periodically or as a cherry picking fashion they will pick it, or they will that time not realize that the problem of interpolation and Pathabheda is a real, but it's not exclusive to Mahabharata. It is true for Puranas, but also that assumption, that background information from Purana, Mahabharata, whichever way it is interpreted, also comes into the epigraph, right? So the question I want to ask is, see, ordinary folks, are confused because of this. And sometimes the route they take is a very simplistic route of convincing themselves, which is also, what can they do? Like they will say, okay, my guru says this, my sampradaya says this, I like this particular researcher, I will listen to him or her, or I'm just going to follow this book, or I will just follow what comes to my mind. And that creates that confusion. Okay, what can you say about these attempts of, say, Indic researchers to, because you're specifically saying you are insisting on the Mahabharata text or focusing on Mahabharata text, what will you say about these attempts of, say, Indic researchers to circumvent the Mahabharata text on the ground, such as, say, they have a Pathabhed or interpolations, while blindly trusting Puranas or epigraph or even later Indic narrations or even Greek narrations about India?
I would start by saying there is actually nothing wrong in taking references from Puranas or other Indic narratives. Even in my book, I have used the 10 plus Puranas and also like multiple Indic narratives like Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya, and Yoga Purana, a book of Swami Yukteswar Giri, etc. But it is very important to know the stature of those evidence which we collect from other sources. They can only be secondary evidence. Okay, no matter what Puranas say what about the beginning of Kali Yuga, it will always be a secondary evidence. You can only use that as a corroboration for the claim of Mahabharata. My claim is very simple. Mahabharata text is the primary source for anything and everything related to the Mahabharata. Okay, so if there is an event that is occurring in Mahabharata, then Mahabharata text should be the primary source for that. Mahabharata text should reserve the right to be the first text to be analyzed during the research. So that's my claim, and we have already seen and we saw that there is actually 100 evidence from the Mahabharata related to the beginning of Kali Yuga. So that means Kali Yuga is like an integral part of the Mahabharata text. All right. So the onus is on the researchers to explain why they are not considering this internal evidence of the text, and also like Hitchens razor applies. What is claimed without an explanation can also be like debunked or rejected without explanation.
Right. And you also mentions when referring to other researchers, like they will the reverse causation almost, like think of a correlation where they will focus on they will start with the tradition of Kali Yuga and then use that to connect with the dating of Mahabharata. Not surprisingly, there are hundreds of folks in the totally wrong area, like based on what you are saying, 3102 BC area plus minus 200 years. So that's a kind of a issue of a reverse causation. Like, where do you begin? You said because the Kali Yuga, at least even in the tradition, is connected with the Krishna, connected with the Mahabharata war. Therefore, Mahabharata text must become a primary evidence. That's what I'm hearing from you. Somewhat different question, but related to this. Again, you will hear this often. I mean, I have heard this, but I wonder if you hear it in the first place. But the question is, well, people will ask, why is that's not a question, my question, by the way, but I get that question all the time. I thought I will ask the same question to you and get your perspective. Why is did the determination of the dating of Kali Yuga beginning or therefore that of Mahabharata is important? And what will you say to those who say that dating is not important and we should only focus on the message of these texts, like Purana, Mahabharata, whichever it is, Adhyatmic message, the statecraft insights we get from it, the social information we get, and this is funny because this is social information of the Mahabharata times. And then I asked them, what is that Mahabharata times? But let me keep my answer away. But the additional information you get about health, prosperity, virtues, the Naitik behavior and so on, that is embedded in the epics. So my question is, why is the determination of the dating of Kali Yuga or Mahabharata is important, and why not just focus on the other message, non-dating message?
Like for some dharmic folks, from dharmic perspective, the dating of the epics may not be a priority, right? Or might not be important. But from a Rajyanga perspective, means from statecraft or administration perspective, that too, especially in the current times, it is extremely important to know the date of these epics. If we have to like counter the breaking India forces. Now, why do I say breaking India forces? I mean, what does that have to do with our conversation on Kali Yuga and Mahabharata? Because just think about it. If you arrive at a date of Mahabharata anytime before 2000 BC, the Aryan invasion theory is automatically debunked. You need not have to like specifically concentrate on Aryan invasion theory, right? Just arriving at a Mahabharata date before 2000 BC will automatically take care of debunking the Aryan invasion theory. And also, conversely speaking, if you have to like debunk the Aryan invasion theory, so what the primary objective of yours will be to prove that the location of Rigveda or Mahabharata was in the subcontinent, was in India, right? And now with the current advancement of physics, we know that our existence, like what we are experiencing, is not just a three-dimensional place. Like you cannot just say a object was in XYZ coordinate. There is also a dimension for time. We are living in a space-time combination in our existence, right? So to identify the place, it also like automatically comes with a time. So like to logically locate any place or event in the past, you also need to have a dating aspect to it. So as I said, whichever way you see, if you have to counter the current left arguments or narratives, dating is important either way.
Now, Jivan, what happens is, I mean, that's all good. And some people, I mean, a good number of people read books. They will read the book. But for most people, it's like comes down to a very simple question. Just, it's like, tell me when it began. Like, I remember when I published my book on the dating of Mahabharata and my first lecture right in this city here. And it was at the Diwali function. And one of my friends, he just came to me before I was going to speak. And he said, hey, you know what, can you just tell me in my ear, what is that ear of whatever that ear that you have figured it out in my ear, So, and so I just said it to him, like 5561 BC and he said, that's it. Okay, thank you very much. Now you can take your time, so he was not interested in the details. The reason I mentioned that is like, if we go to your book, say we didn't discuss that today, or I didn't ask you that question, like second chapter, what is a yuga? And there you have put forward a 4-quadrant type of framework, which is to say yuga is not always understood only in the chronological sense. It is understood in the evolutionary sense, or sometimes psychological sense, physiological sense, and so on. And I would encourage people to actually read that. I'll not go into the details, which means sometimes it just has no connection with a physical chronological time that what we think of anytime we hear of a yuga. So since you have written the book on this subject, Jivan, like the beginning of a Kali Yuga, I'm very confident you are going to always get this question. Okay, so if they understand this four-quadrant framework, they, in my mind, they should not be asking that question. But I think they will ask that question. You will always get this question because I have not done work on yuga and I get that question. So the question there is, they're going to ask you, so hey, that's great, now your book tells us when the Kali Yuga began, but more pressing matter for them possibly is like, so tell us now, when is the Kali Yuga ending? And my question to you, what have you found for the benefit of this crowd, which is huge, by the way? When is the Kali Yuga ending?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would like to apologize for whoever asked those questions to disappoint you, because there is, as of now, there is no one single claim for the end of Kali Yuga. In fact, till now, I have found five different dates or theories for the end of Kali Yuga. So, like, first one is Mahabharata. Now, contrary to popular belief, Mahabharata does not contain like million years of Yuga. There is only thousands of years Yuga mentioned in Mahabharata. So, according to Mahabharata, if you take 5561 BCE, we are right now in Treta Yuga. Okay, and Kali Yuga ended like in 4000 BC. Now, some of you might say, like, how is that possible? We are like the current social conditions like look like Kali Yuga. But like a sort of surprise to you, if you take traditional date of 3102 BCE, you would be living in Krita Yuga right now. So that's one theory. And then Yuga Purana actually states 58 BCE as the end of Kali Yuga and the beginning of Treta Yuga. And you also actually find inscriptional support for this claim. And next, the Puranas, as you know, they speak of 432,000 years of Kali Yuga. So, no matter the date of Mahabharata war, don't bother, Kali Yuga is not ending anytime soon, if you follow the Puranic narrations. And then, coming to sort of recent and modern theories, Swami Yukteswar Giri. Now, he's actually the guru of autobiography by Yogi. So, he's the guru of that Yogi. And according to him, we are currently in Dwapara Yuga. And Kali Yuga ended like 300 years ago, in 1700 CE, 300 years back. And then recently, Sadhguru has claimed that we are currently in Dwapara and Treta is going to start in 60 years. And here I would like to point one thing, that according to Sadhguru, Kali Yuga ended 2500 years ago, in 500 BC. And also, to add to your point, like you mentioned, right, we should not mix four quadrants of yugas, like one quadrant with another. In fact, Sadhguru's Yuga theory actually provides a very good case study for this, because Sadhguru actually tries to combine philosophical yuga with chronological yuga, and it leads to like a number of confusions. In a short time, my paper is actually coming out about the yuga theory of Sadhguru. So,
Okay.
as you see, there are five different theories for the end of Kali Yuga. And like, how can we pick, or how can we choose one theory over the other? And in my subjective conviction, as of now, I cannot take Ramayana as a primary source for the end of Kali Yuga. I took Mahabharata as a primary source for the advent of Kali Yuga, because it was Mahabharata text is a contemporary source for the advent of Kali Yuga. However, for the end of Kali Yuga, it is not a contemporary text. To give an example, in Mahabharata, we get to see Ramopakyan, where entire Ramayana is narrated inside Mahabharata, right? But we cannot take that narration of Mahabharata as a primary source to research Ramayana. Valmiki Ramayana should be the primary resource or primary text to study on Ramayana, whereas the Mahabharata narration will help us as a corroboration. So that exactly applies here also. Mahabharata cannot be a primary source for the end of Kali Yuga. However, if we build up any claim, then we can use statements from Mahabharata as a corroboration. And luckily, like as of now, it's going to be one of my future projects. And if Sri Krishna wills, we will be going to see a Yuganta too, end of Kali Yuga.
Okay. See, for me, Jeevan, I mean, I hear that question coming from people like, so when is the Kali Yuga ending? And I say, I don't know the answer, or sometime I'll give a humorous answer. Like, say, for example, today is what, 18th of December, I'll say, well, I don't have any specific evidence, but based on my subjective conviction, which means no objective evidence, I'll say, well, the Kali Yuga is going to end on 18 December 2622, so I just jokingly say that, because I joke about it, because I am, at least in my limited understanding, I am not sure what even ought to be my motivation for knowing the end of Kali Yuga. Like in that 4 quadrant format, I mean, it's like or even Mahabharata says Raja Kalasya Karanam, meaning if Raja can determine with his behavior, or administrator with his behavior and his virtues, the kind of yuga that comes for his area of administration, then I think we can extend that to each one of our individual, like how I behave and how I create a situation around me should able to change my yuga. And you see the examples of that Raja Kalasya Karanam in that flavor in Mahabharata itself. But since what we see is that, the when we try to take something like what you have distilled in your book and try to take it to masses, I mean, that's why the book is written, or why we are doing this quick introduction about the book, is to take this insights, take this wisdom, take this knowledge, whatever you want to call it, to the masses. And then masses, of course, are going to use it in their own ways, like depending on their level of shraddha, buddhi, whatever it is. And, they can take different routes. I mean, that happens to everything. A dogmatic route, a very dull route, very idiotic route, and also intelligent route, depending on how they want to use this information. What do you think is the best method to disseminate what you have done is wonderful, amazing. These wonderful insights that you have derived from this multi-text study, I would say, for the Kali Yuga beginning. What do you think is the effective way to take this to Hindus, Indians, the humanity, the world around?
So, right now, I'm doing my part of duty, you can say, for Indic narrative. Like, I have written a book, and I'm writing blogs, and I'm giving talks about the research that I am making. So, this is how much one single person can do, right? If I stretch beyond this, it will also start to affect my future research or my ongoing projects. So I would request the readers to not let your learning stop at this one talk. Right. I would, I keep getting the comments or requests from viewers that I should start speaking in their mother tongue, so that their family or their friends can understand the knowledge that we are giving here. So I would say, don't wait for Jivan Rao to start speaking in your mother tongue. Right, you got to see this lecture, or you got to see this talk, and or you got to read my blog. Then you take the responsibility or onus on yourself to explain it to your friends, explain it to your family. So it should be like a organic chain reaction, right? We cannot force everyone to get to know about our work. The audience or the viewers, whoever is happy or felt they got any new knowledge from the talks or books, so they should take the onus upon on themselves to share the knowledge with their friends or families. And also, Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman, like he said, explaining a concept in simple terms is the best way to understand something. So it will also help viewers to get clarity on the topics. So I would say this is the way to take this research or work to the masses.
Okay, I have a quick concluding question, I would say. So, you see, people would have heard this, and still it's like a lot of information in a very short amount of time. If you have to summarize in, say, 2 sentences, whatever you have done, and of course, I would encourage people to read it. But what is the takeaway? I mean, one is like when the Kali Yuga began, that's fine. But so what? I mean, what is the implication of your research in terms of implications of your research for the Indian narrative, Indian civilization? That's the question. Last question, and I'll give it to Ojasvi after that.
So, if I had to summarize the implications, I would start by saying the dating of the Mahabharata war is not dependent on the dating of the Kali Yuga. It is the opposite. The dating of the Kali Yuga is dependent on the date of the Mahabharata war. And quickly, another point, I would also go on to say that no Mahabharata researcher can claim to have arrived at a Mahabharata date using the internal evidence of the Mahabharata text, and at the same time accept 3102 BC as the beginning of Kali Yuga. So this is the implications, if I have to summarize it in 2 points.
Vedveer Aryaji, who also is a very extensive chronology, he indulges in extensive chronology studies, has this concept of yuga and chatur yuga, saying that it is a cycle of 5 years. And he says that Kali Yuga is going to be of a total of 1818 days, because that would be the total amount of 5 years. What would you say about that concept by Vedvirarya ji?
Okay, so we should understand, like I would start by saying any claim that we make should be based on a Shabda Pramana from any ancient Indian narratives, right? So a yuga of 5 years is actually found in Rig Veda. I mean, from Rig Veda itself. Rig Veda has a mention of yuga of 5 years. But if you come to Mahabharata times, even there is a passing mention of 5 year yuga. But however, when Mahabharata talks of Kali, Treta, Dwapara, or Krita, it is talking in terms of thousands of years. And also, the Shabda Praman we have from Mahabharata about the Chaturyuga is 4,800 years for Krita, 3,600 years for Treta, 2,400 for Dwapara, and 1,200 years for Kali. This is the Shabda Pramana we have from Mahabharata. So anything other than this, I would say it's a subjective conviction of the researcher, and the onus is on them to provide the subject Shabda Praman or the evidence, scriptural evidence backing those claims.
Another question I would like to ask Jeevanji and Nireshji is that it was very interesting to know that there are some inconsistencies between the commentaries of exemplaries talking about the chronology of the beginning of the Kali Yuga, the ending of Mahabharata. So, according to you, if somebody wants to research on Mahabharata and the chronology from there on, what would be the hierarchy of the Indian Hindu texts that they should, in terms of their credibility?
I would start by saying, if you research contemporary text should have the highest priority. If you have to research anything related to Mahabharata text should have the highest level of priority. So that should be your primary source. If you have to research anything on Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana should be your highest level of resource. And then, other than that, once you come out of your primary source, anything and everything that you find, you can use it as a secondary corroboration, And some valuable secondary evidences are Puranas, actually. In fact, Puranas do a very good secondary evidence. So you can use them as a very strong corroboration points. But the issue starts when you use the Puranas itself as your primary source to build your claim. So I would say like the contemporary text and then the Puranas and then any inscriptional or other commentaries that you can find. This should be the ideal hierarchy.
I wanted to know that what would be the birth of Kalki's timeline like, and what would the birth look like, if you have any insight on that?
So again, this would depend on the end of Kali Yuga, right? So for that, we have to first identify the total duration of Kali Yuga. As I said, there are like 5 different theories for the end of Kali Yuga. If you have to follow Sadhguru, you can like say Kalki was born 2,500 years ago. Because according to Sadhguru, we are right now in Dwapara and Treta is going to come in 60 years. So this is a very end of Kali Yuga, as of now, has been a very subjective, you can say subjective research. Like everyone has their own sort of theories. For example, Swami Yukteswar Giri brought up the concept of ascending and descending yugas into Hindu yuga theory. It was not, it is actually not present in either Surya Siddhanta or Mahabharata. So if you take this ascending and descending theory, then there is no room for Kalki, because if you look for our Puranic narratives, Kalki actually marks the end of Kali Yuga and the beginning of Krita Yuga, according to Puranas and Mahabharata. However, if you accept Swami Yukteswar Giri or Sadhguru's Yuga theory, after Kali Yuga, Dwapara comes. So Kalki's own objective, whatever is defined by our Indic narratives, is not even like required if you have to follow Swami Yukteswar Guru or Sadhguru's Yuga model. So answering your question, it's highly dependent on the end of Kali Yuga, and to know that there are other complications. Like you have to decide which yuga model you have to follow. Mahabharata's yuga model or modern Swami Yukteswar Giri's yuga model. And also you should know the precise length of the Kali Yuga. So once you have all that, you can make an educated guess about Kalki. So as of now, it's going to be my future work.